All right, day 2 on working with all of those pieces that are behind me in that drying rack. Stiles have all of the groove in them, so do the rails. We just got to take the rails, run them through the router over here, and create the tenon that will actually slip into the groove of the stiles and create this square, the rectangle, or the box, or whatever you want to call it, that the insert will go into. But that's what we got to do today. But I was thinking this morning when I got up and just, as a family, we studied the Bible and we're going through Matthew 14. And at the end of Matthew 14, there's a story in there about Peter walking on water, right? And if you're familiar with the story, you know it. If you're not, then Jesus just gets done feeding 5,000 men plus women and children miraculously. 5 loaves, 2 fishes. That was what he had multiplied on their behalf. And then tells his disciples to get into the boat and cross and go over to the other side, and he'll meet you. He's like, I'll meet you over there, middle of the watch, which I guess is about 4 a.m. He just comes walking by on the water, and there's a storm, and the disciples are rowing against the storm, and they're just being battered by the waves and the wind, and they get kind of freaked out because they're like, man, that sure looks like Jesus. No, that's a ghost. And Peter just kind of like stands up and he's like, Lord, if it's you, tell me to come. And he's like, come on. And so, Peter steps out of the boat. Peter, looks at the wind and the waves and starts to sink and yells out, Lord, save me. And Jesus stretches out his hand and saves him and brings it back into the boat. And just like, man, why did you doubt? I started thinking about that, about just of the Lord waking me up at 4 a.m. and saying, hey, you need to make these doors and drawer faces. And I don't want to because it's going to make me anxious and it's going to extend the amount of time that I got to be here in the house. And Peter, out of obedience of hearing the Lord's voice, gets out of the boat and steps on the water. And I started thinking about that. Like, what would that feel like, The sea is not unfamiliar to Peter. He grew up around it. So he's familiar with the Sea of Galilee. He's familiar with the water. He's familiar with the storms that are around the Sea of Galilee. He's familiar with the winds. He's familiar with the waves that are on the Sea of Galilee. He's probably swam in the Sea of Galilee. And so, I imagine him taking his first step out of the boat and like, yep, that's what it should feel like. And then at some point, he forgot what he heard and freaked out about what he saw. And I started thinking about that, about, my garage. It's familiar to me. My tools, they're familiar to me. But if I start looking at all of this that's behind me, it can be a little overwhelming. But what am I going to do? Am I going to stop and go, I'm not doing this. Like, let's just move on to the next part of the project, which is laying tile, and forget about what the Lord asked me to do? I can't do that. Or am I going to, I don't know, just become numb to it and just like freeze and sit in the house and just worry about, how much longer it's going to take? I can't do that. Like, I got to trust what the Lord, what I heard from the Lord, and that is to go ahead and make these things. And so, I don't know, I'm not walking on water by any stretch of the means, but I just want to be obedient to what God has asked me to do. And in the simplest thing, I heard his voice and he said, make these drawer faces and door faces. And so that's what I'm going to do. So today, hopefully we're going to finish dealing with the rails and getting that part of the process done. And then we got to cut all the inserts and let's just go do this thing and keep putting one foot in front of the other. First thing we need to do is we need to swap out this bit here that created the groove in the rails and the stiles and put on the bit that is actually going to make the tongue. So all the stiles and the rails have been prepped. Now all I have to do is actually have to make the insert panel that goes in between the frames of the stiles and the rail. This groove here in each of these stiles, and rails for that matter, is 7/16 of an inch. So when you add those two together, it's actually, this opening comes out to be 7/8 of an inch. I don't want to make this tight. I want to leave a gap in here for expansion. So instead of cutting this to 7/8 where it fills this edge right here, I actually want to leave a little bit of a gap. So I'm going to, instead of 7/8, I'm going to make this with 3/4 of an inch for it to expand and do what it needs to do and have a little bit of movement. So if you take, knowing that your overall dimension is, let's say in this case, we're going to do one of the upper doors, it's 16 and 5/8. So take 16 and 5/8, subtract your 4.5, and then add back 3/4. That is what your width of the inset panel needs to be. And so let's just do some quick math here. So 16 and 5/8, no, that's way too many. How about 5/8 minus 4 and 1/2 plus 3/4 comes out to be 12 and 7/8. Or you can just do this the simpler way and go, what is 4 and 1/2 minus, this is really tricky to do, minus 3/4, and you come out with 3 3/4. So you can take your original number, overall dimension, and subtract 3 3/4 from that. I'm just going to keep going down this list and marking what my inset panel needs to be. And then I'm going to go over to the table saw and rip a bunch of stuff. So it's been a couple of days since I last left you, and I was using my measurements to figure out the inset pieces to go in between the rails and the stiles, and I ended up making the one for the pantry, clamped it up, brought it inside, and realized, hey, that's about a 1/2 inch short than where it needs to be. So I double checked my measurements, and I actually had some measurements wrong. I cut them correctly. Everything came out to what I originally wrote down, but some of the numbers that I originally wrote down were not correct. So today we're going to start off by redoing your screw up. And back to my biblical characters of Aholiab and Bezalel, I just wonder if they ever had the same thing. Maybe they didn't. Maybe they had some workers underneath them that just kind of messed it up. And they're like, that's not really it. You got to go back to the drawing board and remake it. At least I have power tools to deal with. They didn't. So yeah, let's get to remaking these guys. We have finished ripping all the inserts for every door face that I need to make. It's funny, I was sitting here and I was thinking, as I was holding these pieces here, and I'm like labeling, like these 4 are for the laundry room. And for whatever reason, I kind of felt like these were cards. Like, oh, it's like the game of Uno, and I got these huge pieces of these huge cards. And then I kind of felt like, you know, like when you play Uno and like people are just ganging up on you and they're just like giving you the what for, here's a draw 2, the reverse, you know, wild. It's like, I don't know, I felt like I had all of these door faces, like I just got overwhelmed. It was like, and the next turn was to somebody and they're like, oh, I'm going to give you a draw 4. Like, I need more of these things to do. I use it as an analogy just to talk about like the anxiety of like not wanting to do this and feeling like you're behind, feeling like you should be further ahead in this project than we are. And I started thinking about that. I started thinking about Peter when he was walking on the water. I started thinking about just like, okay, I can't think of like the anxiousness of, oh, now I gotta sand these, and I gotta glue the doors, and then I gotta prime them, then I gotta caulk them, then I gotta paint them, and like all the stuff that goes along with that. And then you gotta put the hinges on, and you gotta all that. You just started thinking about that, and I was like, man, I just gotta somehow encourage myself in the Lord. And so, and it's a biblical thing. David in 1 Samuel 30, verse 6, it says, and David was greatly distressed, for the people spake of stoning him, because the soul of all the people was grieved, every man for his sons and for his daughters. But David encouraged himself in the Lord his God. And I started thinking about like, honestly, this might seem a little weird, but well, just go with me for a minute. I'm going to tell you a story. I'm probably going to butcher some of the finer details, but the overarching point you'll get. If you remember in the video that we did talk about what's really going on, we mentioned that my father-in-law has Parkinson's, which is not something that, it's just a bummer of a deal. And so it's not what we thought, not what we planned. You know, we were just going to go up there and kind of hang out with him and do the homesteading thing, but now it's a great ministering opportunity just to kind of help him and just encourage him and help him finish well. Like with everything he's ever helped us out with over the last 30 years of knowing him, it's an honor to get to do that for him. But I started thinking about a story that he told me when I first, like 30 years ago, he was sharing the story with me, and it's about how the Lord works. And he was sharing the story. He was working up in Boston at the time, and he had this job, loved the job, working at a television station up there. And the Lord came to him in a dream. Now, if you remember, the Lord woke me up in the middle of the night about 4 a.m. and said, "I need you to make these door and drawer faces," even though I didn't want to, because I was already anxious enough and I just didn't want to do it. So he has this dream, and the Lord wakes him up and he's like, "You just need to move back to Texas." He was like, "Wow, okay." I don't know why, but he had this strong urge that the Lord had prompted him to move back to Texas. So goes in, tells his boss. His boss is like, "What? No way." Anyway, so he moves back to Texas, and he's still trying to figure out why he moved back to Texas. And like within 6 months, his father-in-law has a farming accident. Now, his father-in-law came home from work one day, and he was going to hay the cows, and he put a round bale on the bucket, didn't have a fork, put it on the bucket, but he didn't chain it down, and he was backing up, and the cow was in the way, and he stopped quick, and the bale rolled over, and it crushed him. Incredibly traumatic experience. Needless to say, it left him paralyzed from the chest down. Well, my father-in-law thinks, this is exactly why I was called to move back. This is why the Lord woke me up in a dream to leave a job that I liked, and I loved it, and to just set it aside. I had no idea why, but it was for this reason and for this moment, so that I could tend to my father-in-law's needs, whatever those may be, as well as my mother-in-law's for that matter. And so I was just thinking about that today as I was overwhelmed by these deck of cards. I don't know, it just encouraged me. And guys, he's a staunch Baptist, so to have a dream and just get up and be obedient to that and move his family halfway across the country back to Texas, that's a big deal. But I'm encouraged by his obedience. Again, how does that apply to me? One, I think it's a cool story. I'm grateful for my father-in-law and the example that he is of being obedient to what the Lord has asked of him. I don't know why I was supposed to do these. I really don't. Other than, I don't know, it's going to look updated. Maybe that's it. I have no idea. But I was encouraged by just recalling that story. And so maybe some of you today might be anxious about whatever's going on in your life. I would encourage you to encourage yourself in the Lord. It's biblical. Anyway, that's my ramble. That's my rant. That ends this video of making all these inserts for the door faces, and next video, we get to glue all those together and actually see the doors come to life. So thanks for watching.